All right, I think we are finally live. Thanks everybody for waiting. Hope everybody's doing all right today. So today we got Robert Spencer on from Jihad Watch. Now, for those that don't know who Robert Spencer is, he's one of the most prominent figures in the counter-jihad movement today, if not the most prominent. He's also on Fox News a lot of the time, and he's written dozens of books. And I couldn't even keep track. How many books have you written now, Robert?
18, John.
18.
18.
Great.
But the best one, the most important one, is the one that is out now, The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS.
See, yeah, and I've been planning on reading that book too. So I got my copy. I'm just waiting to read it now, but I'm excited for it because from what I hear, it's like the first comprehensive study or the history from jihad all the way to ISIS. Is that right? I mean, from
Muhammad. Absolutely, yes. You're absolutely right. This is the first time this has been done. And so I'm very excited about this book because actually David Wood, our mutual friend, was over by my office a couple weeks ago, and he was saying that he knew what was in the Quran, of course, as many people do, and what Muhammad taught, as many people also know. But after that, it was kind of a blank up until today when you have Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so on. And so this book fills in that gap, and there is no other book that does that. And so I'm very excited about it. Obviously, I've written a lot of books, and I'm not always excited about them. But this is the one to get.
Man, that's really cool. I'm glad. I think everybody's going to benefit from this book, from having it too. So glad that you're able to serve us by, writing a book such as this. So also, I would say too that I've known Robert personally too for a little while now, and Robert's a great and funny guy too. So it's good to have him on here too.
You're hired.
Thank you. All right, man. So first, let's get into talking about your Patreon. Let's just go ahead and get right into it because we don't have a whole lot of time today. Now, your Patreon account. I know our friend David Wood was over and he decided to help you set up your Patreon account. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I am kind of hopeless when it comes to technical matters. And tell you the truth, I wasn't even really clear on what Patreon was all about. But as it happened, I came into the possession of what was formerly a TV studio. And it's kind of a bare space now. But David saw it, and he thought there was a lot of potential in it. And I think he had a good point. So we were talking about it and thinking that we could, if we had the funds, make it into a working studio again. And so what I was planning was to raise funds for that on Patreon, make it into a working studio, and do regular Jihad Watch videos from there, starting with a weekly This Week in Jihad recap, which I had already started, and then also to branch out perhaps to all kinds of things. Really, the possibilities were endless. Debates, interviews, and so on. But of course, well, you know what happened next.
Yeah. So, yeah, and just to backtrack just a little bit, now you started Jihad Watch in 2003, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, so he has a website, jihadwatch.
Is that me? Is that me or you?
I don't think it's me.
Well, let me see. I have Firefox open.
Okay.
Those things that pop up. So sorry about that. Let me just force quit Firefox. You know how they do with those ads, and they come up whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
You know? Sorry about that. All gone.
So you started Jihad Watch. Is it jihadwatch.org or .com?
Yes, it is. Actually, both, but org is the main site.
Okay, org. Okay, sounds good. And since then, now on Google, whenever somebody would type in jihad, you would be one of the first ones to come up because your keyword is actually in your website name and all too. But since then, it's a lot harder to find your site, I've noticed too. And this is true with a lot of conservative sites lately.
Weird. Yeah, there's an imam in Texas, Omar Suleiman. And last year he started pressuring Google because he said there was so-called Islamophobic content that they were putting forth. In other words, true content about Islam that he wanted to hide. And so one of the main targets, of course, was Jihad Watch, because as you say, John, for years, if you Google jihad, not even Jihad Watch, but just jihad, Jihad Watch would be the first thing to come up because it was on topic and it was a popular site. And so Google, in accordance with the wishes or the demands of Omar Suleiman, started to skewer their search results, so that now if you Google jihad, you get all these apologetic and deceptive pieces about how Islam is a religion of peace and jihad is a spiritual struggle and so on. And only after like 4 or 5 pages do you get Jihad Watch.
Yeah, see, and that's about when did this when did this change?
About a year ago, probably.
Gotcha.
Maybe a little bit more. But in February 2017, I remember Facebook started to choke off Jihad Watch. I was getting about 20,000 referrals a day from Facebook, and it dropped to 2,000 or less abruptly one day in the middle of February 2017, and has never recovered. And it was around the same time as that. It seems to be a concerted effort on the part of the social media giants to become Sharia compliant and to choke off any sites that speak the truth about the nature and magnitude of the jihad threat.
Yeah, see, and even Tommy Robinson, trying to find him in YouTube, I noticed it's a lot harder to find his actual page in YouTube now too.
Yeah, sure. YouTube, it's the same thing. For example, there's a lot of controversy about monetization and videos being demonetized. And I always laugh when I see these stories, because my videos have never been monetized. They were never allowed, even from the beginning. I've been making videos for many years, and even before they started monetization. But before they even started it, they just decided that, no, these were not going to be eligible. And that was it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess just to kind of clear up for people that don't know who you are, is your content anti-Muslim?
No, of course not. Anti-Muslim is one of the phrases that the left and Islamic advocacy groups in the United States use to bamboozle people into thinking that it's wrong to oppose jihad mass murder and the Sharia oppression of women and other groups. And in reality, I'm no more anti-Muslim than foes of the Nazis during World War II were anti-German. It's a plain deception. But of course, many people fall for it simply by dint of the fact that it's so often repeated. And that's how the big lie gets over, It keeps being repeated and repeated and repeated. People get it into their heads and they don't even realize.
Yeah, and what's so bad about this too is that even if you're just quoting the Hadith and the Quran and all these sources, even if you're just quoting them and you're actually explaining what it is, like, for example, like Muhammad, had a 9-year-old wife, or a 6-year-old wife. If you just say this stuff, though, and you're quoting the sources, then they consider that Islamophobia, and then they'll start to shut you down.
Yes, that's quite right. And there's all this preposterous nonsense out there about how Aisha, his 6-year-old bride, was actually 18 or 25 or 63 or whatever. And the thing is that the problem with the child marriage is it's not about whether Muhammad was a good guy or not. The issue about how old Aisha was is about Muhammad as the excellent example of conduct for Muslims. In other words, you have in Afghanistan, virtually every girl that is 3rd grade age or older is married, and half the girls that are 2nd grade age. The aid workers, when they went into Afghanistan after the Taliban was toppled in 2003, they found this. This is the problem with child marriage, that it's taken for granted as acceptable in the Islamic world today because of Muhammad's example. So to quibble and say, oh, the sources actually say, which they don't, of course, that Aisha was actually 18 or whatever, that is belied by the facts on the ground in Afghanistan and all too many other Muslim countries, where they obviously know that Aisha was a child, and they behave as if Aisha was a child, and they imitate Muhammad in marrying this child by marrying children themselves. And that is why this is an issue at all. But of course, you're quite right, coming back to your central point. If you point out that the primary hadith collection, hadiths being reports about Muhammad's words and deeds, the primary hadith collection that Muslims consider authentic, Sahih Bukhari, says in many places that Aisha was 6 when Muhammad married her and 9 when he consummated the marriage. If you say that, you're a racist, bigoted, and Islamophobic. But obviously, this is just a tactic in order to silence unwelcome truths about Islam, because it's in Bukhari long before I was born. I didn't write it. You didn't write it. David Wood didn't write it. It's always been there.
Yeah, and this is so interesting. We'll have to get you back on sometime to talk more about this, because a lot of people don't understand the full context of kind of what's going on, and they don't understand why the left and the Democrats and stuff like that are trying to stand up for Islam, because it's all this kind of mess. I would love to kind of talk about the epistemology that kind of leads to all of this at some point. But now, before we get too off topic, let's go ahead and get back to the Patreon. So you started your Patreon only about a week ago or so, is that right?
Yeah, it was very rudimentary, because what happened was David very kindly taped a video of me in the studio space that we were hoping to make into a real studio. And he edited it, put it up on YouTube. You know how David is. He's a whiz with these things. And me, I'm very technologically challenged. So he took care of that and put up the video, and we put it at Patreon. I opened a Patreon account, and then immediately my book hit. That is, The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS, had its publication date on August 7th, which was just a few days after David was by my office and we went to the studio. And so I wasn't able to give full attention to this Patreon account. I did do a couple of live streams. I'm trying to think of the word. These things are so beyond me. But in any case, yes, I was trying to I did a couple of live streams, and I was planning on doing one for the patrons. There were about 630 some patrons, I believe, when they pulled the plug, but they had all come rather quickly. It was only a week or two. And I was going to do a special live stream for them only, and never got to do that. But the point is that it was really just barely getting off the ground. I had not been able to devote full attention to it because my time was taken up with the interviews that came when the book was published. And so then, when I was still planning, next week things will quiet down and I'll deal with Patreon, I got an email saying your account has been disabled because MasterCard doesn't like you. And
let's go ahead and actually, I have the email pulled up here, so I'll go ahead and read it real quick. So it says, "Hi, Robert. My name is April, and I'm on the trust and safety team here at Patreon. I have been notified by MasterCard that we must remove your account from Patreon effective immediately. MasterCard has a stricter set of rules and regulations than Patreon, and they reserve the right to not offer their services to accounts of their choosing. This is in line with the terms of service, which means it's something we have to comply by. I paid out your remaining balance, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry for the inconvenience and frustration this might cause. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm here to help. Best."
Oh, I'm sure she is, yeah. I had questions, John, and I did ask her, well, on what grounds exactly did you do this? And I never got any answer. And I asked her repeatedly, and she would just come back and say, we have to do what MasterCard says, and MasterCard says to drop you, so that's that. And finally, I saw this morning, as a matter of fact, on Breitbart wrote an article about the whole thing, and there was an update on the Breitbart article that said that MasterCard had actually answered them and said that they removed accounts that had illegal content on their websites.
Yeah, now, I actually just read that too. I was reading that right when I was kind of waiting for you to hop on.
I thought that was wild. I mean, okay, yeah. I don't know if they meant Patreon. The Patreon website that I had, which had hardly anything on it, it had the video that David made of me in the studio and a notice that I was going to do a live stream, and that's really it.
Yeah.
And of course, Jihad Watch has about 65,000 posts, but I would challenge anybody to find any illegal content in any of them.
Yeah.
So I don't really know what they meant. And of course, they haven't deigned to explain to me. It's obvious. I think, of course, that it's really about the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has me classified as a hate group leader. And of course, the Southern Poverty Law Center was recently discredited when it had to pay out $3.5 million to Maajid Nawaz, who's an Islamic reformer, for claiming that he was a hate group leader. I would love to sue them myself. The difference is that Maajid Nawaz is in Britain, and Britain has libel laws that favor the plaintiff, whereas in the United States, the libel laws favor the defendant. And so I can't find a lawyer yet to take the case, but I'm still working on it. I'm still hoping to. I believe that I have been defamed and libeled by the Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm hoping to get that case over. But I do believe, since they have such mainstream acceptance, the SPLC, that probably what happened was that MasterCard was working from the SPLC's list and was dropping people on that basis. And that's why they did this. but I can't get that out of MasterCard. That's just a guess.
Well, and that's what's so interesting about all this too. I actually remember a while back, I tried to find, I came across an article from the SPLC on you and Pamela Geller, and I think David was mentioning it too. But it was written so insane to me. It was written very, very childishly like, and it was all name calling. There wasn't hardly any substance or facts or anything to back anything up. And I honestly, I couldn't, I said, what kind of culture are we in where this isn't written like an adult? It's just a bunch of name calling and stuff like that. And that just kind of dawned on me where I was just like, we are in a different time right now. We're in such an emotionally driven, rhetorical state, you know, where people, they don't care about facts anymore. It's all emotion.
Very much so. That's a very good observation, John, because that's exactly what they traffic in. And what they call me and Pamela and other people is anti-Muslim extremists. Now, we've already explained anti-Muslim. I think I should address the extremist thing, because that's a very insidious word for the SPLC to use of me. Because we know, for example, Barack Obama's anti-terrorism program was called Countering Violent Extremism. And it was the US government's policy, it still is to a great degree, to refer to Islamic jihadis as extremists. So you have extremists on the one hand who are killing people, beheading people, blowing people up, strapping on suicide vests and going into crowds of infidels and murdering them. Those are extremists. And then the Southern Poverty Law Center uses the same word for me, Pamela Geller, Frank Gaffney, David Horowitz, and so on.
And the KKK.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Well, that's another thing. I mean, in the first place, yes, they're trying to lump us in with people like the KKK and neo-Nazis. Absolutely. But they're also trying to pretend that we are the equivalent on the other side of the jihadis, and that we are just as extreme as Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, and so on. Now, I've never called for violence, excused violence, accepted violence, approved of violence, none of it. And so the idea that I'm some equivalent extremist to Osama bin Laden or Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, it's plain defamation. But it's a very effective rhetorical trick, and that's why they do it. And it needs to be noted that that's really all they have, as you say, is name calling. They don't really have any substance. And what I would like to know really, but I'll probably never find out, is what the SPLC really thinks it's in it for them. You know, do they think they're going to be spared if the jihad that they're enabling advances, and all the people who are resisting it are discredited, marginalized, and silenced forever? You got to wonder, but we ain't never going to know, probably.
My guess is that I mean, because culture is so big on buzzwords and these strong kind of words that sound so like, it sounds virtuous to fight against them. So if you call somebody a bigot, it sounds virtuous to say, I'm fighting against the bigots. I'm fighting for human rights, women rights, Islamic equality, and all this other stuff. It sounds good on the surface, but those words never line up with what actually is going on, hardly ever. And because of that, they can get away with some of such a motive pool, because it doesn't matter about the facts. People aren't even paying attention to the facts. All they care about is the motive language.
Yes, you're right. We live in an age of sloganeering in which emotional appeals carry the day. And so the Southern Poverty Law Center knows that, plays on that, and then Patreon and MasterCard and these other groups, they look to the Southern Poverty Law Center as if it were a legitimate group. And that's the strangest thing, really. Well, there's a Latin phrase, quis custodies ipso custodes. I probably said that wrong. Yes, I used to teach Latin, but I'm very rusty. And so all of you Latin scholars can correct me. But in any case, who watches the watchman? And this is the question we need to constantly be asking in regard to the Southern Poverty Law Center, that the mainstream media treats them as if they were a legitimate group, and then Patreon treats them as if they were a legitimate group. But actually, they're a far left group that does nothing but defame those who don't follow the leftist agenda by, as you say, lumping them in with the KKK and so on. And so there's really no reason why Patreon should be doing the bidding of a group like this. But this is the world we live in.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I was just thinking as you were talking about, now I'm not a conspiracy theorist type guy, you know, and I've never really been a big fan of Alex Jones or anything that he's done. But I will say, I mean, considering that he's been getting banned and stuff from all this stuff, and I was thinking while you were talking about Linda Sarsour actually called for jihad against Trump publicly, and you didn't hear any backlash about that from the media. You know what I mean? And which is insane because that's way worse than anything else that you guys are doing over here.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is that the media assumes that jihad is an interior spiritual struggle that has nothing to do with violence or terrorism, right? And
Right.
so they hear Linda Sarsour say, call for jihad against Trump, and they think, no, that's fine. Yes, of course, we should all struggle against Trump. And after all, we've already seen that the establishment media doesn't even really have a problem with incitement to violence or calls for violence against Trump. They hate him so much. But in reality, Linda Sarsour was indeed inciting people to violence against the president because she knows full well that jihad involves violence. She's not a dope, and she's an observant Sharia compliant Muslim. She knows that jihad involves violence. She must know, John, that some of the people who heard her were going to think, oh, this means we have to go kill Trump. We have to go try to kill Trump at very least. And she has no problem with doing that. What's really a sign of how out of touch the establishment media is that there was nobody who was willing to call her on it.
See, and in my mind, I mean, after this whole kind of Tommy Robinson thing too, it was just insane. And it was a good reminder of where we're headed as a country. And it really makes me nervous because, I mean, from the outside, I always try to be as like objective as possible. And so I think like, they feel strongly about their opinion. I can understand, you know what I mean, where they're coming from, and I don't really like to say, oh, I'm on this side or this side as much when it comes to some things. But I will say that whenever I take a step back and say, okay, am I deceiving myself because or am I surrounding myself with too many people that think like me or something like that? But I always try to be around the people that think differently. And what I realize is that this side, when it comes to this thing, these people that are defending Sharia law and all this stuff in America, their arguments never make logical sense. That's one thing I will honestly say. It's like it never makes logical sense. And so that's what's kind of weird to me is that like we really are fragmented a lot. And, both sides are going to be driven by emotionalism. But really, when it comes to the left with these kind of things, it's almost 100% emotion and it's hardly any fact.
Absolutely, John. I think that's a very acute observation because we are in a post-rational age, and one in which there is no premium put on rational discussion or logical thought. And emotions do indeed rule the day. You remind me in saying all this when I was speaking, well, speaking is maybe putting it a little bit too loosely. I was getting yelled at for an hour and a half at the University at Buffalo. I spoke there, or I appeared there last year. I stood there last year, and about 300 self-righteous leftist students came out to yell at me and hold up banners and yell and scream and hoot and call me names and such. And I did that for an hour and a half, and then I left. And in the course of this delightful evening I had there, I saw that there was one student who was holding up a sign that said "Queers Against Islamophobia." And as it happened, I thought I was prepared for a hostile audience. I wasn't really prepared to just be yelled at for an hour and a half, but I was prepared for a hostile audience. So I had brought a manual of Islamic law that is certified by Al-Azhar, the most respected institution in Sunni Islam, and the site where Barack Obama made his outreach speech to the Islamic world in Cairo on June 4th, 2009. This is a manual of Islamic law certified by Al-Azhar, and I had it with me. And so I went to the passages that said that those who are homosexuals have to be put to death because this guy was holding up the Queers Against Islamophobia sign. I read out how homosexuals have to be put to death, and the whole place started booing, boo, just going wild, booing and booing and booing. And I held up the manual that I had of Islamic law, As-Salik, Reliance of the Traveler, and said, do you think I wrote this? And this guy in a kufi and a kaftan came down and hugged the Queers Against Islamophobia guy and said, "This is my best friend." And I thought, this is exactly what you're saying. It's the triumph of emotionalism over reason. As if somehow, because this guy is his friend, if they really were friends, which I actually kind of doubt. And because this guy is holding this sign that they were right and righteous, and I was evil for quoting the law, which actually exists and is actually implemented in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in the ISIS domains, in any Sharia entity, homosexuals are going to be thrown off buildings, are going to be hung from cranes, are going to be killed in some way. And so the Queers Against Islamophobia guy could go take his sign and walk around in Riyadh, and he would last about 5 minutes before he was arrested and eventually executed. But reality doesn't intrude on these people. Their balloon never lands. They're living in a fantasy world.
Yeah, and yeah, I remember I saw a couple years back, I was talking to Greg Kokel, and he was talking about, pointing out these contradictions of people. And I was doing this for a while, and I realized that nobody really cared if they were inconsistent. Yeah, and so I remember asking Greg Kokel, I was like, does this work for you, And so after that is when I started thinking about how to effectively make people care. And I realized that you have to get into their world. You have to take two things that they're very passionate about and crash them together, because that's the only way you're going to get them together. People don't care about consistency anymore. And people only care about the facts when they suit their narrative, what they already want to believe. And so we very, very, very much are in a postmodern world where the individual's authority and how they feel becomes the dominant way of reasoning.
Power to you, John. I'm getting old, and all I know how to do is say, here's the truth. Here's what it says. Here's what the books say. This is what I've been doing for 20 years. I'm an old guy now, I think, okay, good luck. If you could get through to these people, more power to you.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that, man. And I think this is an adjustment, by the way, that Christians overall need to be observant about and try to adjust to, because the culture is changing very fast. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I want to ask you a question. I have a little bit of hope that this may turn around when it comes to the censoring, because they've been so vocal about it. The conservatives have, and it's gotten more attention now. Even with Mark Zuckerberg getting pressed and stuff like that too. And they're trying to make adjustments, it seems like, at least they say they are. Do you think that it's going to get better, or do you think that or if this is just a fantasy in my mind, that's never going to come to pass?
I actually do have hope, because the Alex Jones banning from everywhere and Gavin McInnes, Alex Jones, yeah, he said a lot of stuff that's, crazy conspiracy theories and so on. But Gavin, I don't know Gavin very well, but I don't know anything that he said that's so outlandish. And ultimately, it's a matter of, remember Pastor Niemöller during World War II? And he's the one who wrote that famous thing. First they came for this group, but I wasn't a member of this group, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for that group, and I wasn't a member of that group, so I didn't say anything. And finally they came for me, and there was nobody left to stand up for me. And I think that's the situation that we're in now. That people might not approve of Alex Jones, people might not approve of Gavin, people might not approve of me in regard to this banning from Patreon, and who knows what else is going to come next. But the more they do it, the more people are waking up, and they're getting increasingly open about it. I think maybe they figure they can get away with it because they have these virtual monopolies on the means of social communication. And so they figure that that the people can protest, but they have no recourse. Nonetheless, I do have hope, just as you do, that the more they do it, the more out in the open it becomes, the more chance we have to right this. I still do think, and I hope that it will ultimately come to pass, that the antitrust laws ought to be used against these corporations. They have more power over the means of communication than the Soviet Union did at its height, or Nazi Germany did. They are more totalitarian than the totalitarians. And so they do need to be shut down if we're going to have any semblance of the freedom of speech remaining in this country. I certainly hope the Trump administration will take this up and that action will be taken. But certainly, yes, I am seeing more people waking up to it. And so that is a sign of hope.
That's good. That's what I'm hoping for too. So we will see, because honestly, the culture is so postmodern now and so subjective that I don't think a society can last with this much subjectivity. Once you're taking away the structure, everything's just going to collapse, because truth only means whatever somebody feels like. I mean, it's like the abortion thing, that the fetus is a baby if the mom wants to keep it. If the mom doesn't want to keep it, then it's just a blob of cells. I mean, everything like this, the culture just cannot stand. So it has to hit rock bottom, I'm hoping. You know what I mean? Before everything crumbles down.
Yes, absolutely. The thing about that is that it's not going to stand because reality doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You know, if I say, well, this rock here is not a rock, it's a pillow, and so I'll smash my head against it and take a nap, I'm still going to have a fractured skull.
Yeah.
And so reality is going to intrude one way or the other. And it can either intrude by means of the invasion of another culture that isn't buying this nonsense, which is something that's very much on the horizon, or by enough people waking up to stave that off. And I still hope that it'll be the latter, but it may well be the former.
Well, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get you on live too, because I believe that more and more people need to hear about these type of things, the censoring with conservatives and that sort of thing, because the more people that hear it, the more that we're able to do something about it. It's like the dirtier that it is. If more people keep pointing it out, saying how dirty it is, then somebody has to come and clean it up eventually, you know? That's why I encourage everybody that's watching this video to share the video and share these type of stories and stuff like that, because the more people that can see this, the more people that know what's going on, and then the more adjustments that these social media platforms have to make. Now, also, Robert, I will say that, actually, I have a question for you. What do you think is the cost? I'm trying to think of the right way to word this. With so much of the censoring, why should we care if the people that we disagree with get they get their platform taken away?
Oh, well, that's a very good question. Yeah, because I do see a lot of people on Twitter saying it to me, you know, oh, well, you're a terrible Islamophobe. So, okay, hooray. And Alex Jones says crazy things. So therefore it's all good. The problem is once you accord this power to these authorities, then what if they turn on you? What if they decide that tomorrow we don't like, I can't even think, you know, some sort of, I don't know, vegetarians or something. And then all of you are deplatformed. Then what? And so once you accord them the power, then you've already lost the game. And all they need to do is adjust their target, and then you're gone. And in a free society, the reason why there is freedom of speech is to protect against this kind of tyranny, so that one group can't just enforce its will by silencing all the others. But there's a free and open marketplace of ideas. People seem to have lost sight of that entirely nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so that way we're clear too, to get back to the Patreon thing, so the explanations that they gave you was because of MasterCard, and then MasterCard said it was because you had
illegal content. Yes.
Yeah. Actually, I have the MasterCard quote up here. As part of our normal process, we share information about websites that may have illegal content with the acquirer, a merchant's bank, that connects them to our network and accepts credit card payments. The acquirer would then renew the site for compliance with the legal requirements and our standards. They would then determine what action to take. In this case, the acquirer advised us that they decided to terminate acceptance. So,
illegal content. So yeah.
It sounds like,
I don't know what it is. They didn't tell me.
Yeah.
Apparently, I'm an international crime baron now.
So what I'm assuming then is that, I mean, because whenever these stories sound this crazy to me, there's always something that's going on. If somebody does something wrong, you can easily point out, say, okay, they did this is why they're blocked, right? But because it's so crazy like that, they're clearly just like, they're not being upfront with the truth, you know?
Oh, certainly, yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, look, what crime am I committing? My website, Jihad Watch, for 15 years, I've been tracking jihad activity. That's illegal. I've been saying, oh, wouldn't it be terrible if we allow for the diminution of women's rights or the equality of rights of all people before the law? Don't we need to defend these things and the freedom of speech and the freedom of conscience? That's criminal. You know what? It's criminal. It's criminal only under Islamic law,
right?
Not under American law. And so I think it's a very telling thing. Is MasterCard saying that it's now accepting Sharia and enforcing Sharia blasphemy laws? That's the only sense I can make of their statement.
Yeah, and what's scary about it too is like with Tommy Robinson, he still has no idea why he was even, what he was even charged, or he understood that he's charged with contempt of court, but they didn't give him any details. And this is the same kind of thing that's happening with these conservative voices, because it's quite obvious that people are just trying to shut down conservative voices that they just disagree with. They just don't like them. And so that's really scary to me, because when you give an inch to this, they're going to take as many miles as they possibly can.
Absolutely, yeah. And the thing about Tommy is that Tommy was calling attention to the Muslim rape gang activity, which, as you know, is justified in the Quran, that you can take the captives of the right hand and use them as sex slaves. That's Quran 4:3, 4:24, 23:1-6, 33:50, and 70:30. Look it up and check my work. But the fact of the matter is, for years, the British authorities were covering for these people because they didn't want to be accused of Islamophobia, and they were not prosecuting them. And so finally, Tommy was, for years, was calling attention to this, and ultimately they silenced him because they were embarrassed about how they had dropped the ball on this and enabled this activity. And so really, it's all about still covering up for the Muslim rape gang activity. And that's why Tommy had to take the fall. He was calling attention to their own failure and their own betrayal of their own people.
See, and that's just, it's so terrible, because it's kind of scary. That's why if things don't turn around, we're going to end up like the UK, which is an absolute disaster right now. You know, and so I'm a little worried for it, but hopefully people will become more objective and start to see through these type of things, is my hope.
I certainly would hope so, John. Tell you the truth, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
But there's going to have to be a reckoning one way or the other. And certainly the left is itching for a civil war, and I'm afraid they might get it. And it will be determining it will be a determining factor, that is, as to whether we continue as a free society or become a totalitarian state as the left wants, in which only one point of view is allowed.
So real quick, and then you guys can write in your questions right now too, because we'll do questions for a little bit before we close. But real quick, I'm curious your thoughts on this. So from the left and from these people that are trying to silence you, in their mind, I would assume they would justify something like this. This is as charitable as possible. I would think they would think, if he's saying that the Islamic theology leads to violence, or if he points out these verses, then more people are going to get radicalized, and then more people are going to end up murdered and stuff like that. So I'm assuming that that's how they probably would justify silencing you and shadow censoring you. But what would you say would be the other alternatives here?
Okay, let's say that Islamic jihadis are using the Quran and the example of Muhammad to recruit among peaceful Muslims and to justify their violence. So then I point out that, hey, look, the Islamic jihadis are using the Quran and the Sunnah to justify violence and make recruits among peaceful Muslims. And they say, you're the problem and we'll shut you up. Okay, so what happens then? Then the recruiting and the justifying of violence and the incitement to violence on the part of Islamic jihadis continues unopposed and unimpeded.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Whereas if I call attention to it, then more people will wake up to it and perhaps resist it. And so what they're actually doing is enabling jihad violence. Doesn't that make sense?
Complete sense. And that's the thing, is I'm a systems guy, right? Yeah, in some ways. So I think if you don't solve the problem at its core, the problem's never going to go anywhere. It's like if the trunk of the tree is still there, pulling off leaves isn't going to help. You have to actually chop down the tree, or they're just going to keep growing. And so would you say that the problem is not you telling people stuff, but instead it's Islamic theology that needs to be called out?
Absolutely, yeah. And then we can deal with it from there. We have to assess where we are honestly and realistically in order to get where we want to be. And so if there's a problem in Islamic theology, we need to identify it. And then people of goodwill, Muslims as well as non-Muslims, can try to formulate honest and realistic ways to move ahead. But if we pretend that there's no problem and pretend that Islamic theology is just wonderful, then the people who are exploiting the violent aspects of Islamic theology in order to make jihadis are just going to keep going without any hindrance.
And what's so crazy about this is that in Islamic theology, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're seeking world dominion, right? They want to have a theocracy where Sharia law is enforced and Allah is at the head of the theocracy and stuff like this. And what's crazy about it is you would never think in a million years that a place like America would say, okay, you can come here and we'll accept you, you know what I mean? And all these countries do this until they get outnumbered by Muslims. And then that's when the theocracy is enforced. Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And see, the United States has a lot of confusion nowadays. Even when I am going around the country and speaking at various places, people say, well, hey, isn't this, they have the First Amendment, it's religious freedom. You can't stop them. And I think, wait a minute, when did religious freedom become a license to break other laws? The founding fathers never intended that when they formulated the Bill of Rights and made this the First Amendment. And so people are confused, and they think because this is a religion, that therefore we can't do anything about the aspects of it that are inciting to violence and are working to subvert constitutional principles, are working against the equality of rights of women, and so on. It's ridiculous, really. The religious freedom was never intended to be some sort of suicide pill that would destroy the republic.
Absolutely. Yeah. So now, so we got about 10 minutes left or so. Guys, if you sent comments, sorry, go ahead and send them one more time. I'm watching right now. So I'll see your comments. But real quick, Robert, now that your Patreon has closed, I think we need to support you now more than ever. So where can we support you? Do we go through Jihad Watch to support you, or have you thought about starting a Kickstarter or something else like that? Or
I was thinking about, actually, when we're done, John, I'm going to look into Indiegogo, and I might start a crowdfunding campaign there if I can. And otherwise, donations are accepted at Jihad Watch. You can go to jihadwatch.org, and there's a big sort of reddish pink donate button, and I appreciate that very much. But this was actually something that I was doing apart from Jihad Watch in trying to build this studio, and I'm still hoping to do it. So watch for updates. I hope to have the Indiegogo campaign up tonight if I can.
Very good. Okay, cool. And also, too, I'll put a link to Jihad Watch down in the description. And if Robert does update any more information, like he starts a Kickstarter or something like that, I'll also put that into the description as soon as he does. So you can always check back. So now let's get to a couple quick comments before we go. Renee says, Robert, do you think MasterCard sees the irony in banning you for illegal content when all you do is read the Islamic literature to establish why Muslims do jihad?
Oh, I'm sure MasterCard doesn't have the slightest idea who I am or what I do. They just probably, like I was saying before, they know that I'm on the SPLC's hit list, and that's good enough for them. And so they figure this is somebody we don't want to deal with. And they probably, if you were to ask whoever did this at MasterCard, they would say, oh, he's a hateful, bigoted Islamophobe. But that's about all they know.
Yeah, and I'm sure they don't care, too, because that's just how it is. And I think about social media has been very bad in a lot of ways because, and I've been wrestling with this a little bit to see how I kind of want to proceed on my channel. Well, a problem for me, I think, with social media is that it kind of divides people to the extremes. And so it kind of stops communication because you can't talk to somebody who's like the most evil person in the world. And so we completely just throw people to both sides all the time, too. But it's unfortunate that social media is built that way. The algorithm is designed that way to keep you hearing people that you already agree with. But what's worse about it, too, is that it's actually made it so extreme that people are acting like this in real life as well now, too. So, yeah.
Antifa.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, any more questions here?
Why are you so evil?
Yeah.
Nobody's asking that?
No, that'd be funny. Maybe, I don't know. Why are you so evil, Robert? See, there's that evil laugh. I knew it.
Original sin, John.
All right. I may have missed some more questions. Anybody else have any questions? Yeah, so people keep asking, too, how they can support you, you know, and so, like I said, we'll look down in the link and see what we can do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it very much, my friends, and watch for Indiegogo. I'm hoping to have that up tonight. Of course, they may ban me, too, but we'll be there pitching.
Very good. And do you think that MasterCard or Patreon is ever going to give you any more of a answer than what they've given you already, or no?
No, but I am talking to lawyers because actually, as far as I understand it, and I could be wrong about this, accusing somebody of committing a crime is actually a crime in itself.
Right.
And so I am going to take them to court if I can.
Very good. Yeah. And so people know too, the Southern Poverty Law Center, who we were talking about earlier, they actually just partnered with YouTube at the beginning of this year, I think it was. And so I can expect for more and more conservative channels and stuff to be shut down or shadow censored, because like Tommy Robinson, it's insane to me. If I can type Tommy Robinson into a search and I can't find his channel, you know what I mean, without putting on the filter and then putting channel, then that shows me that he's been completely shadow banned and he's not getting the attention that people want to see. And so it's quite scary. So for all of you guys that are out there, continue to pray for all of us that are on social media and doing all this, and continue to try to keep getting out our content and sharing it, because otherwise people probably aren't going to stumble across it.
Thanks, John.
No problem, man. So yeah, Robert, thanks for chatting with me today, man. It's always good to see you, and I'll get you back on here soon, and we'll talk more about kind of like the context so people can understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and also what's at stake for if we don't narrow down and try to be more aggressive about trying to solve the problem.
Thanks. Call me anytime, and I apologize if I'm a little less coherent today. Been flying all day, very tired, very little sleep, so I hope I made a little sense.
Oh man, I'm the exact same, man. Yeah, I'm going off little sleep, new baby.
Oh, that's right. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
I saw the picture.
yeah, good. Yeah, I just so my brain's just a shot. So I hear you, man. Well, anyways, yeah, thanks to everybody that commented in and put your question and comments, and thanks so much to the super chats. Sorry I didn't get time to give you a shout out. I did see Elizabeth gave a super chat, and also Appy. Is that Appy or Apple? Apple. Sorry, I can't see. Apple Goo. No, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for all the support, and God bless you guys. We will see you guys next time. All right. All right. Thanks again, Robert.
Thanks. Good night, John.
All right. Bye-bye.